its inception in the 1970s to its response to the AIDS crisis, the American gay liberation movement used zap action as a political strategy in confronting public figures. A zap is a form of political direct action that is designed to embarrass a public figure or celebrity, while calling attention of both gays and straights to the issues of gay rights. The first group to organize zaps included the Gay Liberation Front, which was committed to nonviolent resistance to oppressive laws. The gay liberation departed from the politics of civility that characterized the polite pleas of inclusion that were seen in the homophile movement, and instead focused their effort into militant resistance. While the early zaps focused on protesting negative representation of gays and lesbians in film, newspapers, and other media, my favorite zap occurred in 1970 at the Second Congress to Unite Women, when Rita Mae Brown and other lesbians brought lesbianism to feminism. Not only is this my favorite zap story, but it's my favorite story in queer history. So let's get started. Rita Mae Brown was born in Hanover, Pennsylvania to a young unmarried mother and was left in an orphanage. She was there taken in by her mother's cousins, Julia and Ralph Brown, and was raised in York, Pennsylvania before moving to Fort Lauderdale. Both Julia and Ralph were active in their local Republican Party. As a child, Brown was smart and very opinionated. She was driven and she knew what she thought and who she was. She attended the segregated University of Florida at Gainesville on a scholarship, but this quickly ended after Brown angered the administration with her civil rights work and her openness about her sexuality. Both behaviors were seen as unacceptable by authorities, and she was asked to leave the school. After transferring to another college, she decided that she wanted to explore better opportunities and hitchhiked her way to New York. There, she was accepted to NYU on a scholarship in 1964, but she had no money for a dorm, so she was homeless during part of her time at NYU. In 1969, she graduated with a bachelor's in English. While at school, Brown came into her own as a political powerhouse and organizer. She helped organize the first Women's Center in New York and was also one of the co-founders of the first LGBTQ student group in the country. In 1968, she was a member of NOW, the National Organization of Women, but left, or rather was asked to leave, because of her sexuality. She felt the same oppression when she tried to join Redstockings, a radical feminist group of mostly heterosexual women. She once again left, or was asked to leave, due to the group's lack of involvement in lesbian rights. Looking for a place where she could fight for her rights as a lesbian woman, Brown joined the Gay Liberation Front in 1969. But here, she also felt like an outsider, as the gay men of the group resisted the lesbian issue. While some of her lesbian peers at the Gay Liberation Front decided to stay and work to change the organization, many others, including Brown, decided that they needed to strike out on their own and make their voices heard. That is when Rita Mae Brown had an idea. She brought together lesbians she knew from the Gay Liberation Front and proposed writing their own manifesto. A group of about 20 women, who coined themselves as Radicalesbians, wrote the short, hard-hitting declaration titled The Woman Identified Woman, in which they argued that the lesbian identity, because it revolved only around women, was at the center of feminism.
It reads, "What is a lesbian? A lesbian is the rage of all women condensed to the point of explosion." It goes on to talk about how being a lesbian is different from the homosexual male, as well as the heterosexual female, although it commands attention from both movements.
Then Rita Mae Brown had a second idea, and that idea stemmed from a comment made by Betty Friedan, the founder and director of NOW. NOW, or the National Organization of Women, had been founded in 1966, and the time that it took to be founded to where our story begins, it had already begun to make significant progress of changing laws and minds regarding women in America. By 1970, the group had made its opinion clear, though. Lesbians were seen as a harmful menace to the women's movement. Betty Friedan, who started the women's movement with the publication of The Feminine Mystique, thought the presence of open lesbians in the organization would give feminism a bad reputation, as lesbians were seen as social outcasts, mentally ill, and criminals by the mainstream straight society. Furthermore, she worried that the association would hamstring feminists' ability to achieve serious political change, and that the stereotype of man-hating and mannish lesbians would allow politicians on both sides of the aisle to dismiss the movement. In 1969, Friedan removed the New York chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis from the list of sponsors of the first Congress to Unite Women in November 1969. If you want to learn about the Daughters of Bilitis, make sure you check out my third video, and I go into depth about this organization. But the same year that Betty Friedan removed the DOB from the list of sponsors, she also used the phrase Lavender Menace to describe the lesbian women in NOW. On May 1st, 1970, NOW was hosting the second Congress to Unite Women, which was supposed to be a weekend of feminist talks and workshops. The event was held in a middle school in Greenwich Village, New York, and there was over 300 women in the school's auditorium waiting to hear speakers and start discussions. But just as the first speaker was approaching the podium, the lights went out. A minute later, the lights flashed back on, and suddenly there were 17 women, including Rita Mae Brown, standing around the room wearing t-shirts. Their shirts were hand-dyed various shades of purple and had the words Lavender Menace written across them. Standing amongst the seated feminists, they held up signs bearing phrases like, "Take a lesbian to lunch," "Super Dyke loves you," and "Women's liberation is a lesbian plot." As the 17 women stood there, more women, who had been planted in the audience, began to stand up. Karla J., a lesbian rights activist, recounts how she stood up and yelled, "Yes, yes, sisters, I am tired of being in the closet because of the women's movement," as she unbuttoned her long-sleeve blouse and ripped it off to reveal a Lavender Menace t-shirt. 40 more women wearing the shirts soon appeared. And then Rita Mae Brown yelled to the members of the audience, "Who wants to join us?" Several of the members replied with a yes, and Brown pulled off her Lavender Menace t-shirt, revealing another one underneath, giving it out to the women in the audience. After the initial stunt, the Menaces passed out copies of the Woman-Identified Woman before taking the stage. Once on stage, they expressed their anger of being excluded from the conference and the movement as a whole. A few NOW organizers tried to step in and take back the stage, but they gave up after the audience clearly showed their support for the radical lesbians. The group used the microphone for a spontaneous speak out on lesbianism in the feminist movement. And the next day, NOW organizers invited the Menaces back to run workshops on lesbian rights and homophobia. This ZAP was a success. The Lavender Menace ZAP and the publication of the Woman-Identified Woman are remembered as turning points in the second wave feminist movement, as a founding moment for the lesbian feminist. After the ZAP, many of the lesbian Menaces continued to meet and decide to create a lasting organization, which they called Radicalesbians. At the next National Convention of NOW, in September of 1971, the delegates adopted a resolution recognizing lesbians and lesbian rights as a legitimate part of feminism. Brown and her co-authors of The Woman-Identified Woman caught the truth at the exact right moment, showing NOW and the rest of the world that lesbians were women, but often had different concerns than heterosexual women. They were homosexuals, but they also had different concerns than the gay men. Brown's work and the work of the other Menaces remind us that the LGBTQ+ acronym is great, as it includes a large number of people, but it also reminds us that each of those letters represents a different group with specific individual experiences that need to be articulated. The Lavender Menace knew that working together is important, but being able to work for the needs of who you are exactly is equally important. Rita Mae Brown continued writing political essays after the woman-identified woman, but also began writing fiction. In 1973, Brown published the semi-autobiographical Ruby Fruit Jungle, which tells the story of Molly Bolt, a refugee from the South, who moves to New York City in order to be herself and fulfill her dream of becoming a filmmaker. The book is filled with politics, along with humor and great storytelling. It contains many scenes regarding lesbians that were considered shocking at the time, but it became a model for lesbian-themed novels that followed. Today, Rita Mae Brown has a number of best-selling titles under her name, and while she stopped being actively involved in the LGBTQ rights movement, she continues to use her platform to speak out and fight for what is right. To learn more about Rita Mae Brown and the Lavender Menace, check out these titles. Tales of the Lavender Menace by Karla J., which shows J's life as she comes to age during a time of social and political movements that fundamentally reshaped American culture. In this novel, we hear J's account of the Lavender Menace, along with her own story. You can also read The Woman-Identified Woman directly from the Radicalesbians. There's a PDF copy in the Duke Library, which I have placed a link to in the description below. I also recommend reading Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. While partly fiction, it is a great work and also features many ideas and themes from her own life. Lastly, while it makes a short cameo, I recommend watching the miniseries When We Rise, which is based on a book by Cleve Jones. In the show, we follow Roma Guy, a lesbian feminist activist, as she partakes in the Zap and stands up to now. This has been my personal favorite queer history story in the 10th episode of Everyone's Gay. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like and subscribe below. Also follow us on Facebook. And big news, we have an Instagram, so make sure to go find us on Instagram at Everyone's Gay Queer History. This has been Everyone's Gay, a look into queer history. I'm Alexis Harrington. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.